So, Rini Ushla, Tavoltarov, Galer, Higlaran, and Nashunta Naheran, you're all extremely welcome to the National Library of Ireland this evening to mark an incredible book chosen by One Dublin One Book, obviously Snowflake by the one and only Louise Nealon. And just to say that we are really delighted to welcome you all here to mark the occasion. Just to acknowledge the amount of work that's gone into it, but particularly by Anne-Marie Kelly, the Director of the UNESCO City of Literature and the Dublin Literary Award, and obviously all of her team, and indeed our own exhibitions, learning and programming team here in the National Library of Ireland, but particularly Breed O'Sullivan, who's been a huge partner, I know, with Anne-Marie Kelly and everybody at One Dublin One Book throughout the numerous years that we've been a partner with the Dublin City Council initiative, which is obviously not just under Dublin UNESCO City of Literature, but also Dublin City Council, and supported by our own department here in the NLI, the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. And the idea behind One Dublin One Book is to encourage people to read a book connected with Dublin during the month of April. And obviously a series of events are rolled out as a result of that particular book that's chosen. It's been a reading initiative since 2006, and the National Library of Ireland has been a key partner since the very early days of the campaign. Louise Nealon's book, Snowflake, published by Manila Press, is really an outstanding example of the One Dublin One Book initiative this year for 2024. And just to acknowledge the seminal publication that it is, Louise. I also want to very much welcome here Dr. Garrett Fagan, who's taught at universities in Dublin and indeed at Warwick University in the UK as well, who has interests in Renaissance literature, legal literary relations and Anglo Irish writing. Dr. Fagan is teaching a course of 4 classes in April at the Pierce Street Library on this year's One Dublin One Book choice, Snowflake. Dr. Fagan is also very familiar with the National Library of Ireland, having regularly tutored UCD lifelong learning classes in literature here in the NLI. And I know Garrett will subsequently introduce both Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald of UCD and obviously Louise Nealon. But just to, I say very, very briefly, a few words about this particular space that we're in this evening. This is the Richard Hayes Room. It's a really newly renovated space here in the National Library of Ireland. And in addition to our reading room, where we occasionally have large-scale lectures, and also a new seminar room that will be opening at the end of the month, which is 100-seater. I just want to encourage you to use your National Library as much as you possibly can, and to check nli.ie as well as One Dublin One Book for information as much as possible. But Richard Hayes, who this actual room is named after, was the director of the National Library of Ireland in the 1940s and 50s, and he is known as the Nazi codebreaker. You would have heard of Bletchley Park, but you might not have heard of the then director of Ard Museum, or Laurelin Nashunta Naheran, I should say, the National Library of Ireland in the 1940s and 50s, which was obviously Richard Hayes. He was an incredible linguist, a very noted cryptographer, obviously, in terms of breaking the code. We thought the least we should do here in the National Library was to name a room in his honour after what he did for not just Ireland but Europe. So that's, just want to say, this is one of the very first events that we've held in this newly renovated space. So you're extremely welcome. I'm just going to pass you on now to Dr. Garrett Fagan, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the National Library and to the inaugural event of the 2024 One Dublin One Book Festival. We're joined this evening by Louise Nealon. Louise is from a farming background in County Kildare. She studied English at Trinity, just down the road, and creative writing at Queen's. Her book, Snowflake, was published in 2021 and was published to great acclaim at that time, and won the Newcomer Prize at the An Post Book Awards that year, and I think is currently being translated into Chinese, German, Russian, a few other languages. So you're a global phenomenon, Louise. And also we're joined by Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald, who's the head of Irish, Celtic and Folklore at UCD, and is also the director of the National Folklore Foundation. And Kelly is an expert in Irish folklore, both ancient and modern. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk for a little while, and then towards the end, if anybody has questions, we're happy to take kind of questions. Both Kelly and Louise are happy to take questions from the floor. So I thought we might start really, Louise, if you might kind of read us a short section of the beginning of the book to kick us off.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to read from the opening section of Snowflake. It's called Caravan. My uncle Billy lives in a caravan in a field at the back of my house. The first time I saw another caravan on the road, I thought that someone, another child, had kidnapped him on me. It was only then that I learned caravans were meant to move. Billy's caravan never went anywhere. It was plonked in a bed of concrete blocks, right beside me from the day I was born. I used to visit Billy at night when I was too afraid to go to sleep. Billy said that I was only allowed out of the house if I could see the moon from my window, and if I brought him wishes from the garden. On the night of my 8th birthday, the sight of a round, fat moon sent me straight down the stairs and out the back door. The wet grass on my bare feet, the thorns of the hedge grabbing me, pulling me back by the sleeves of my pyjamas. I knew where the wishes hung out. A coven of them grew close to the caravan on the other side of the hedge. I picked them one by one, satisfied by the soft snap of stem and sticky juice of severed end, the bump of one fluffy white head into another. I cupped my hand around them as though protecting candles from the wind, careful not to knock off a single wisp of wish and lose it to the night. I twirled the syllables around in my head as I collected them. Dandelion, dandelion, dandelion. Earlier that day, we had looked up the word in the big dictionary underneath Billy's bed. He explained that it came from the French term, dandelion, lion's teeth. The dandelion began as a pretty thing, and the petals of its skirt were pointy and yellow like a tutu. This is its daytime dress, but the flower eventually needs to go to sleep. It withers and looks tired and haggard, and just when you think its time is up, Billy held up his fist. It turns into a clock. He uncurled his fingers and produced a white candy floss dandelion from behind his back, a puffball moon, a holy communion of wishes. He let me blow the wishes away like birthday candles, a constellation of dreams. Billy marvelled at the bouquet of wishes I presented to him when he opened the caravan door. I picked as many as I could find to impress him. I knew it, he said. I just knew the moon would come out for your birthday. We filled an empty jam jar with water and blew the cottony heads of the dandelions into it, their feathers floating on the meniscus like tiny swimmers lying on their backs. I closed the lid on the jar and shook the wishes, celebrating them, watching them dance. We left the jar on top of a dank stack of newspapers to stare out of the caravan's plastic window. Billy heated a saucepan of milk on the hob of his gas cooker. His kitchen looked like a toy I hoped to get for Christmas. It always surprised me when it worked in real life. He let me stir the milk until it bubbled and formed little white sheets of skin that I pulled away with the back of the spoon. He poured in the chocolate powder and I whisked the spoon around and around until my arm hurt. We tipped the steaming brown stream into a flask and brought it up to the roof to watch the stars. It took days for the dandelion seeds to fully submerge in the jar. They clung to the surface, hanging from their ceiling of water, until it seemed like they either gave up or got bored. Just when the world thought that they were goners, tiny little green shoots appeared like plant mermaids growing tails underwater. Billy called me to come over and marvel at the stubborn little fuckers, the wishes that refused to die.
It's such a beautiful lyrical opening to the book, and I think you really kind of set up there, some of the kind of the themes of kind of like wishing, the moon, nighttime, dreamtime that kind of the whole book kind of explores. I don't know, Kelly, is there any kind of folklore around dandelions and wishes?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me here this evening. I'm delighted, and I was delighted to spend time with Louise's book, and particularly I had the task at hand to look at it from a folklore point of view, and that's the intro. I mean, that's it. And in a way, it's what a writer does in letting us spend time with how we look at the world and the things that can disappear so quickly but are so important to us. And that whole sense of wishing good luck to come to us or wishing bad luck to get away from us, all of these kind of tiny actions we do again and again and again, and we don't give much time to them. And I just think her character there is just so fantastic in how she really allows us to spend time with that and then not letting it just go. Because think of it, so often we make our wish and they blow into the wind and we let it go. And here we are with someone who really wants those wishes to grow and go somewhere. And she has us in the palm of her hand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there seems to be such a dichotomy in the book and in kind of modern Ireland. If you think about kind of, modern farming, farmers mapping their fields with GPS, keeping their kind of headage on their smartphone, and yet this seems to kind of coexist with gifts of divining, healing, fairy thoughts. All of this sort of folkloric world kind of seems to coexist at the same time, and they don't seem to kind of disturb each other. How then do the kind of these real and the preternatural kind of coexist, and how did you kind of bring them together? Was that an easy or a difficult thing to do in the book?
Yeah, so this is mad, by the way. This is not a normal situation to be in. It's like, I'm in the middle of two academics talking about like a book that I wrote in my childhood bedroom. So like I had to make myself stop like studying for this event because obviously it's an event on mythology and folklore, and I did read up a lot of those on a lot of those subjects for Snowflake, and then immediately forgot all about them, not knowing that years later I'd be back in the National Library trying to rack my brain and think about what I meant to say. Colin Barrett, another Irish writer, he said that you write a book and then people expect you to tell them what it's about, and you don't really know. So with Snowflake, all of it, like all of the mythology and the folklore, it came from a childhood spent on a dairy farm. Billy is a complete figment of my imagination, as is Debbie and Maeve, and all the characters in the novel, but they exist in a parallel world. I know exactly where they live. They live down the road from me in Kildare at the end of a hill we call it Marion's Hill because Marion lives at the top of it. But it's a hill that goes really far back in history. It's part of the 1798 rebellion. The Hill of Allen is at the top of it. I can always, like, every time I go for a walk or run down that hill, I envision their house there, and it is a parallel kind of world to the one that we're living in now. But it's all fed by my childhood and the stories that really helped, like, buoyed me in childhood. So there's Alice in Wonderland in Snowflake. I badgered my dad into reading Alice in Wonderland to us when we were younger, much to my sister's disgust. There's the reasons why the Greek myths are involved is because I knew from the start that Billy lived in a caravan and he looked at the stars. And if you look at the stars at all, Greek myths are going to come into it. And then once you get down on earth level, that's really when the Irish mythology came, because land is so important, and maybe you can do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Again, we always think that there's this tension between tradition and modernity, and the world has made us look at it like that. Once we have modernity, what else do we need with this? But we need these traditions. They're our imagination, they are our creativity, they are interpretations of the world around us. And no matter how far we get involved in science and scientific thought, we still need that creative side to us. And in a way, it's kind of wonderful when we see with Debbie kind of growing, and as she coming into the city and dealing with modernity in her own way, kind of having to reconcile, well, what is this world? You know, you can't just leave it behind in that regard. And that sense of particularly that agricultural sense of the world and being so connected to tradition and how things happen. But at the end of the day, economically, you need to do well, and you'll take on whatever equipment you can to help you with that as well.
But even still today, like my dad will ring a diviner or a healer to come, and if he has a cow down, he has a number for a man who he rings up, and suddenly the cow's up again. And
it validates it. See, sorry, not to be a disbeliever. Yeah. See, I know this is, but again, we see the world, and then it can be, you know, again, you're kind of stuck in that situation that you need to do something, right? And there's that sense of comfort because this is how it has happened in the past, and we will continue to carry on with this way, you know. And it's almost, if you wanted to do a scientific study, how often does the cow come back or not come back? That's a different thing. I don't do that. I just look at it from the way in which this is a community. I'm in need. This is a person who has kind of been designated as someone who has knowledge that goes beyond the science, right? And that is really important for us. Yeah. Again, it's not this black and white situation. And the amount of healers and healing. And then you could see it very interesting now if you look at alternative medicine and other ways and avenues that people want to look at terms of healing and what happens, but it's really still really, really strong.
Something that I was interested with doing in the book is there's the reason why I gave Billy has divine powers is his abilities are not so different from Maeve's, but with his, it's more community based. Maeve is locked away in a room with all of her myths and is very much hidden and not connected to the wider community, whereas Billy denies his powers and he's a reluctant diviner. People come to him and he gets people bringing him gifts to the caravan in order to do cures or to divine, but his ability is validated and is needed. In a way that Maeve's isn't, and I'm wondering if there's something in that.
And it's really interesting. And again, you can look at the gender thing there as well, very much so. But I would say so many of the diviners or healers that I've interviewed during my time, there's a kind of a spectrum, and many of them would feel very reluctant, but they would feel the honor and the kind of the importance of carrying it on, because quite often if it's a seventh son of a seventh son and various ways that designate a person that has these traditional ways. And they often, I cannot tell you how many times I've interviewed a diviner in particular, and they'll be like, I don't think I have anything, but people come to me and they obviously leave happy, and they keep on telling other people, and more people keep on coming, and I will never take any money for this. I cannot take any money for this. And those really strong sense of this is such a gift for the community that quite often we would have tales or legends that if someone were to take money for that, the gift dies, it goes away. And so there's this kind of knowledge that this is beyond the kind of material world, and that this is beyond me as an individual. And then you have Maeve. We've all met Maeves. We've all met Maeves in our life, and we always want to be Maeve. But do we want to be Maeve? No. But she is that pure, in that sense, she's that kind of pure artistic creativity. I mean, she doesn't care. Like she, you know, it's a kind of very different thing of what she embodies in that sense of what we want, that doesn't quite connect to the world, but obviously is, you know, almost this kind of, she's not a banfasa. She's not this wise woman, but she has knowledge of the other world. And she really almost lives purely in her own world that can be seen as this kind of other world space. And then you have Debbie kind of going between the other world that is that and her relationship with her mother, and Billy being very much connected to that knowledge, and then coming to, you know, the kind of material world of Dublin. It comes across very strong.
I think kind of you make a really interesting point, this idea of a kind of Maeve's inward gifts that are not valued by society more broadly, and kind of Billy's useful gift that he doesn't want, that he kind of refuses, that is valued and validated by people. And I think, you know, that perhaps one of the reasons why folklore and ritual persists in Ireland in such kind of a rich tradition is because it has a kind of a community utility, a kind of a community focus. And one of those things that many people are familiar with is kind of Cemetery Sunday. And so perhaps we might hear the Cemetery Sunday bit.
So the characters in this are Maeve, obviously the mother, James, who helps Billy out on the farm, and is 6'7" and captain of the local hurling team. And Debbie kind of fancies him, but he's in a relationship with Maeve. When we arrive home from the beach, James goes out to milk, and we spend an hour and a half getting ready for Cemetery Sunday. Everyone descends in the graveyard for the annual evening outdoor mass. It's an event that is both a novelty and an effort, a cross between a silent pilgrimage and the world's most boring outdoor concert. We stand over our dead relatives for an hour and have a nosy at how well or poorly the other graves are kept. The headstones are staggered in neat rows. At the top of the hill there's a large wooden cross, 4 metres by 2, apparently the precise size of the one lugged up Calvary. It used to be a crucifix with a life-size Christ on it, but some shitheads robbed him, leaving behind a lone left hand nailed to a cross. It's the priest's first Cemetery Sunday, and it shows. His feet are wobbling on the makeshift altar that has been set up in a trailer attached to the back of a Ford Transit van. He's been a good sport though. Father John is a slight Filipino priest. The community took an instant liking to him because he is affable and able to hide his intelligence, sort of like a holy Louis Theroux. The football team managed to get him down to training. He turned out to be a nippy corner forward. He seems happy out, drinking with the lads on Sunday nights and playing along with the running joke that he'll see them at Mass in the morning. The blessings of the graves is always a shit show, but this year's is especially bad. The choir are trying to pass off Leonard Cohen songs as hymns. Hallelujah is blaring out through dodgy speakers. They're on the verse about your one tying him to a kitchen chair. James nudges Mam and whispers something, and they both laugh quietly, their shoulders shaking. Of course, people have clocked that James is standing at our family's grave and not his own. He finished up milking late, and our grave is closer to the gate, so he just slipped in beside Mam. His mother, Shirley, has a face on her like a slapped arse, but she'd never say anything to him. I'm jealous of Mam standing beside James. He seems like gravity itself, standing all tall and broad-shouldered with his big, strong hands. Hands like shovels, our Jim Bob, Billy says. Billy is the one who shortens James's name, Jim, Jimmy, Jim Bob. If he calls him James, it's sarcasm, usually to get at Mam. It's a power thing, I think. Listening to them talk, anyone would think that James was the one who owned the farm. He's the one that gives the orders and calls the shots. Men who call to the back door are never looking for Billy, always James. Before James, they looked for my grandfather. Billy prefers it that way. When anything goes wrong in the yard, it's not his fault. We're standing at my grandparents' grave. I'm named after my grandmother, Deborah. It's weird seeing your name written on a headstone. I was told that my grandmother died in her sleep. I learned of the overdose later. It was never said outright, but it was implied by things Billy said when he got drunk and sentimental. Then I heard the story about what the church sacristan Betty said to Billy one night in the pub around closing time. Billy is a nervous, small woman who isn't able to hold her drink. Billy was trying to knock a bit of crack out of her, but then out of nowhere, She shouted that Debbie White was the devil's whore and should not be buried anywhere near consecrated ground. Billy squared up to her and said that if she breathed another syllable about his mother, she would have to pick a window for him to throw her through. They still call him Pick a Window down the pub. Father John is going on tour now, descending from the steps of the trailer to sprinkle the graves with holy water. 90-year-old Mrs. Coughlin has been carted up graveside in her wheelchair with a full duvet snugged up to her chin. She looks as though she's ready to be tipped in beside her husband. Billy isn't religious. This is the only mass of the year he attends in order to pay his respect to his parents' grave. He makes sure that the grave is kept clean and the flowers watered. He gets them a poinsettia for Christmas. For now, a pot of yellow primroses graces the gravestones. Primroses were my grandma's favourite flower.
So we can see Cemetery Sunday can be as much about divisions in a community as kind of bringing everybody together. And I think we've all kind of had those experiences in graveyards for various reasons. But Kelly, there must be a kind of a roots to kind of Cemetery Sunday. There must be a kind of folkloric background to that.
Well, and I think, again, thinking of the community, the kind of grassroots vernacular side of the community, and the blessing of the graves is, I mean, I'm sure many people in this room have been at a blessing of the graves or make sure that they're home for it when it happens and things like that. And it really does bring people together. And I think it's quite wonderful because it's outside the church, you know, and it kind of brings back this sense, you know, we have this image of very early Christian Ireland where Mass and the rituals would have happened outside of the church. And we're there with our ancestors, you know, you're there with the graves. And so, as you know, Billy is not religious. And it's that tension again between perhaps the organized church and if we look at more popular religion or folk religion, this is still the church, you know, the Mass is being said, the priest is there. So we do have that happening, but yet so much of what the community needs is why we're here together. And again, Louise just did so well in how she brings us in with all the characters. So we are there with them. You know, we have our parallel experiences, and then we can absolutely imagine what it would be like being there at that. And that sense of, you know, particularly in this day and age, like what is the role of the church within communities and how do we engage with it? But then we see aspects like this coming from the grassroots, that it's still really important and these events are still very much marked in the calendar and coming from the bottom up.
And, you know, people who feel quite kind of, whose faith is, you know, pallid to non-existent, something like Cemetery Sunday still is a kind of a hugely important thing for them to kind of to be there, even though they might freely admit, you know, they have little or no kind of faith themselves. So I think you kind of you captured that kind of really well. One of the things that I was really interested in reading the book was the way in which you deal with kind of gifts, the dream world, things that are kind of preternatural. And, you know, very often kind of writers do that and they choose to go down a kind of a magic realist route. I don't really think you maybe did that here. What were kind of the challenges just as a writer in trying to write about things that were unreal, if you like?
Yeah, magic realism is such a strange term. It's a very complicated, convoluted history. It originated as in the 1920s in an art critic. Franz Ron was his name. What he meant by it was a move away from expressionism. So before painters were kind of like painting their emotions or whatever and kind of like abstract, and he moved it. He used magic realism as kind of like a move away from that back towards realism, but realizing the magic as like associated with the natural world. And one of the reasons why I chose Snowflake as a title was because I I found a photographer on Instagram, a Russian photographer, Alexei Klaktov is his name, and he takes photographs of snowflakes just on his balcony. He has a black wool and a kind of like lens sellotaped, like duct taped to a camera. And when it snows, he just takes a million photos. And every so often he lands on absolute gems. And I saw a snowflake in the shape of a St. Bridget's cross. And I was like, well, that's my title. But the reason why I was so taken by it was because the idea that I had that started the whole book off was I was 18 and I woke up from a dream and I wasn't sure, like I was terrified of the dream because I didn't recognize anything in it. And so I emptied all of that, madness, I would say now, into one character, into Maeve, and locked her in a room. And that's kind of how I dealt with the dreams in the novel. But they are there. I got so much feedback on early drafts of the book saying that the book didn't need the dreams, that it's a straightforward, realist, like a realist novel. But I couldn't. I felt like the reason the story is there is because there's the dreams at the heart of it. It all goes back to Maeve's bedroom looks an awful lot like mine. The room where I wrote the novel in it, because I had all of these pages and pages of dream research. Very little of which I actually used, but it felt like a bolster, or a kind of like a balm, and nothing in reality kind of reassured me as much as stories. Very soon after that dream, I was put on antidepressants and brought to therapy. But also I read the story of Cassiopeia, and that helped me more than the antidepressants, because the story of Cassiopeia is a Greek story about a queen who she's condemned to spend the rest of her life upside down in the stars. And I was like, imagine, like, we're all going to go home tonight.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And fall asleep and just disappear out of ourselves. And then we'll wake up in the morning and re-enter reality. And I just thought that I still think that's insane. And so I think that there's space in there is, like, we tell her, like Joan Didion said, we tell ourselves stories in order to survive. And the single most important thing that I've done for my own sanity is to read fiction, and is to read stories that are magical, that like don't tie us to the everyday world where I can't really express everything that I want to say. So, yeah.
You're dead right to keep your dreams in.
Yeah.
There seems to be kind of a big split in the novel between kind of Debbie's Dublin life and her student life, which is very kind of material and concrete. It's about kind of things, having things and doing things. And her rural life, her life at home, which she feels much more comfortable. And she's allowed to be kind of much more introspective, and has much more richer internal life when she's at home, when she's kind of away from Trinity and away from Dublin. How do you think the book balances this kind of city-country split?
So for so long, the book was entirely set on the farm, and Debbie didn't really go anywhere, and nothing really happened. It was just me writing stuff about the farm, I was actually doing a course in the Irish Writers' Centre with the Sting and Fly, and I remember Sean O'Reilly was reading the course. He was like, "They never actually go anywhere, do they?" I was like, "Oh, I better send Debbie off somewhere." So I was like, "Oh, she's 18. Well, I'll send her off to college," and that's literally how it happened. And the first scene that I wrote was her first day at university, Freshers Week, and it all kicked off from then. I met Xanthi, and once I had Xanthi kind of represented a lot of things about Dublin that that I kind of
ambiguous feelings about.
Yeah, yeah. But I in the end, I actually like Xanthi is one of the ones that really surprised me. When you're a writer, you don't know everything that's going to happen in the book. I ended up really having a soft spot for Xanthi, but in a way that I really didn't think that I would, because she's the anti-Debbie. She's she seems a lot more independent and capable, and not as close to her family. But she kind of is attracted to Debbie and the White family for that reason, that they're kind of messed up a bit. But, yeah.
But I think the folklore, it's not just the purview of the rural, is it? Can we see kind of university life, being a young person in the city? Is that a kind of something that has a kind of a folkloric aspect to it, do you think? Or do you see Debbie's experiences as framed within folklore?
Oh, absolutely. Again, that traditional vernacular world. As soon as you say Freshers Week, again, we all many of us will remember what Freshers Week was like. And when Debbie is kind of a part of the gang and Xanthi has her into her flat before they go out for the evening, that ritual of getting ready with your friends before you go out, choosing what you're going to wear, putting the makeup on, those are some of the most important rituals in, as a young adult's kind of life. That is where you make your bonds. That is your community. You will die for these people. And then you go out to the battles of nightlife. You need this armor around you. So I think it's just fantastic, again, really, when you start to look at it and see traditions are made everywhere. Rituals and traditions and belief systems, they are occurring in numerous places. So again, we have the stuff that we really think of in that traditional world here in Snowflake. And then you do so well, Louise, bringing us into those traditions within the city, within the college life, within Dublin, and a map of where people are going and what's happening. And so many people will feel, yes, I went through those same traditions during my time. Or I want to. Younger people may be like, yes, that will be my life.
I think Debbie and Maeve have quite a kind of a very loving relationship, a kind of fractious relationship, and there's a lot of kind of friction there. But one of the most tender moments in the book is the description of the kind of the milk bath that Maeve gives her daughter.
Sorry to say tender, and I'm like,
maybe
I don't know
not
about
so.
that.
Yeah, it's tough love, maybe, but But there's a kind of it's a moment of kind of certainly kind of maternal concern and kind of attention.
Yeah.
So maybe if we can hear that and then.
Yeah. So this chapter is actually from I went and did some dream research, and apparently there's a thing in Buddhism that people put milk in their eyes in order to help them see better, and that gave me the idea for the milk bath. And also milk is just readily available on a dairy farm. So there's that too. I'm afraid to go to sleep. I don't want to go and knock on the caravan door, but I'm not a kid anymore. I need to stop searching for the full moon from my bedroom window. I try to disappear into my phone, but the internet is slow. The cool side of the pillow makes me feel like my head is floating on water. Then I remember the time Mum gave me a milk bath. I creep downstairs and put one of Billy's coats over my pyjamas. I open the back door and feel the relief of the night's wind on my face. The torch on my phone lights up the calf shed and makes it look like a silver castle. I grab the can and empty the bucket. The milk comes out in a twirl of silk and smacks the bottom of the bucket. I feel someone grab my elbow and turn around to find a calf sucking on my arm. It retreats to the back of a pen. I stretch out my hand and wiggle my fingers at him. He comes forward again, head bowed, and smells me. Finally, gives the tips of my fingers a lick and lets me slide them into his mouth. The suckling gets rougher the more frustrated he becomes when my fingers don't squeeze out the milk he's looking for. It's warm in there. I can feel the ridges along the roof of his mouth. I pull out my hand. Saliva stretches across it, webbing my fingers together. The bucket lags against my leg, weighing me down as I carry it towards the back door. In the field, one of the cows is bawling. I shine the torch over and see that she's down on her knees, calving. The calf is still in the amniotic sac. I know that's bad. Usually the pink balloon bursts and dangles from the cow's tail for a few hours until it splats onto the ground for Jacob, the dog, to come along and eat it. I watch the cow push the sack out of her like it's a giant squid. It slides out onto the grass in a slimy bubble. All it needs is a prod or a poke and it would pop. I know that I should call Billy, but I won't be able to explain why I was out in the yard at this hour. I'm so tired that I'm not even sure it's happening. I take the stairs slowly, trying not to slosh any milk over the sides. I fill the bath with hot water and tip the milk in. It spreads like smoke underneath the water. A bunch of dried lavender floats on its surface, their stalks overlapping. Mum used to use the pretty white-headed weeds from the garden that look like sprigs of baby's breath, but they give me a rash. Once, when I had a really bad dream, Mum gave me a milk bath. I woke her by climbing into her bed and brushing my cold feet against her sleeping legs. There was a moment when I held my breath as she opened her eyes, but she didn't give out to me. She ushered me out of the bed and led me to the bathroom, where I was given orders to strip off while she got milk from the calf shed. I stood in the quiet of the early morning on the cold tiles of the bathroom floor and watched the water gush out of the taps, my arms crossed over my flat chest. Fresh ripples of goosebumps rose in waves over the back of my neck. The bruised light made everything blue. Mum came in with a heavy bucket of milk and a fistful of daisies from the garden. I turned them over in the bath and watched as their white umbrellas bobbed upside down on the water, the tips of their petals tinged with purple. She tried to teach me how to hold my breath underwater. I lasted half a second before coming back up and thrashing water out of the bath. She shoved my head back under again and I bit her finger. She dragged me out by the hair and unplugged the bath. I watched the drain swallow the heads of my daisies. "Are you happy now?" she said, her bark echoing off the bathroom walls. I was howling. "Keep your head under the water," she ordered. "It will help you with the dreams." So I tried harder. I stayed underwater until hot colours flickered and scorched holes in my eyelids. When I emerged from the water, my throat was on fire, but Mum was in a good mood again. She collected the daisies' spongy yellow centres and rubbed them in circles on my back. Then she tailed me dry in rough, swift movements. "You'll have a great night's sleep after this," she said, her breath tickling the hairs on the inside of my ears. A great night's sleep. And she was right. The dreams went away after the milk bath.
Thanks, that was great. So is there...
Very, very maternal.
Very maternal, yeah.
Are you happy now?
Yeah, tough love. So is that kind of the milk bath and the kind of the sort of the flowers thing? Is there a folklore?
Well, I suppose I love that section because really it's that connection between Debbie and her mother Maeve, and again that in a way we often, as we were talking about the diviners and that kind of male line carrying that knowledge. But what's so wonderful in this is that you've created this world of the mother giving her kind of gift of the other world to her daughter. And it's trying to help her daughter deal with that. Like, what does that mean? Like, you have this gift of the dreams. And that is, again, these burdens. We see these, tradition has these burdens, whether we want them or not. And so here, this kind of almost like a poultice or this kind of herbal remedy that's being created. And so much of what's coming through, starting again with the dandelions from the very beginning and looking here of these wildflowers and what they can do in terms of healing. And of course, milk is used for so much, and milk baths is something, that is something very common or kind of commercialized and sold. So I just thought that was just really wonderful, that again, looking at that other world, looking at the ways in which intergenerational knowledge is being passed on, and the necessity or the need to know that it needs to be passed on, and that the next generation will need help with this knowledge.
That's great. Okay. So kind of time is pressing on, but we have got time for some questions. If anybody has any questions, either for Louise or for Kelly, please fire away. We have a microphone if everyone just raise their hand.
Thanks. Just interested in the whole divining of the enchanted land or that. I hadn't come across that before. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, so we had a neighbour who was a diviner. I'm doing another event in April in Naas with a man who's a diviner. His name's Joe Cassidy, and I spoke to him before when I was researching the novel, and he had loads of different jobs, but he was always really unwell, and he ended up talking to a psychologist who told him that he needed to use his gifts, because the reason why he was so physically unwell was because he was suppressing them, and that set him off on a journey, I suppose, and he always had the ability, and he was a man who he was married with two children at the time, and he said he went to a school reunion and he was dreading the question of what people were asking him what he was getting up to these days, and when he said it, two of the lads was like, you saved my life back in the day, because you knew that a van was coming too fast down the road, and you pulled us in off the road. And I was like, that's interesting. So we had a it's one of the things growing up on a dairy farm, where my dad would talk very casually about a man down the road who would get to cure cows who were sick. He also had no, when he put his hand on an electric fence, he didn't feel anything. It was just a bit warm, he said. And then I was about 7 years old next to him, and I put my finger on it. I was jumped backwards. I just thought this was incredible. But it's one of those things where men, especially men my dad's age, would be very blasé about. And compare that to, say, the likes of, say, Maeve in the novel, or that woman who's a bit woo-woo, who believes in astrology and maybe a fortune teller or whatever, but is very I find the gender divide really, really interesting. And there are women who have the cure as well. Less women diviners. Is that true?
Well, Again, where is the official data for this? I mean, you know, like there is no, it's not in the census, but so you could see that men are sometimes more kind of promoted to go to, and men are where people go to when they seek help. But when you look at it, when you look at the Banfasa or that kind of knowledge, and I love it, quite often you have tales where the priest has lost his horse and he's looked everywhere, and he has to go and speak to this kind of woman, this woman who has knowledge of the other world, and she can tell him where his horse is because the other world has taken it. So it comes through legends. It would come much more almost as a female thing in the legends,
Right.
But in my actual field work, it does seem to be people going towards men, or again, a lot of bone setters would be in this as well, which is a physical gift, but then they have this kind of extra side with it as well, of this kind of knowledge that's in another land.
Yeah. So I just find it fascinating, like that these people are walking around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amongst us, like superheroes.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind asking just about fairy forts, because there are a load of them, actually from where my father lives in the north part of Kerry, where he lived when he grew up in the north part of Kerry. And I'm just wondering, like, not that there's any evidence obviously of those fairies, but when was that established that there was a possibility, a linkage between these hills and fields and fairies?
And the other world.
Yeah.
I suppose if we think of it, this is good. And again, sometimes people think there's this seamless tradition in Ireland. But when you think of it, Angus was, Brúna Boinne was Angus's home. Of course, that's a Neolithic, or even perhaps earlier, Neolithic site, which in the early medieval period, they are creating their stories for what happens and this kind of otherworldly sense of it. So when we look at ring forts, those are early medieval homesteads. And as time goes on, as people are no longer living in those spaces, we project our stories onto them. And they're never pedestrian, pedantic, boring, no. So we have this kind of connection with them. So if you think of it, so the previous sites and that image of they're just such a beautiful image, and going into them and what can happen, what happens on this side and what happens when you go into it. But then if you think of into the 18th and 19th century, the haunted house is that big old mansion. And then that has the kind of spiritual happenings in it. So as we look through time on this island, we see where our other world exists, and it's the stories that we create for those who lived here before us.
Can I follow on from that? Because Bristol, where my family, my mother's from, they have fairy forts as well. It's actually very close to my brother's house. So I'm from Jerry background as well, so I can really kind of relate to both my parents are country people, so I can really relate to, like, I was in the cemetery, I was looking at the trees, and I was like thinking, God, is it going to rain this year or not, even though it's in the middle of July. So you always go equipped with your umbrella regardless of what time of year it is. Sorry, another actually side though is when you were talking about the priest as well, and how amicable he is, and how that has differed probably from 40 years ago, when you wouldn't have been as friendly. Like my sister's married to a farmer, a dairy farmer from Westmeath, and the priest is actually in their WhatsApp group. The footballers, that's brilliant, I love that. Sorry, back to the fairy fort then as well. So we grew up beside the fairy fort, we spent a lot of time there in our childhood, and we played around there, and many stories about that. But there was 3, and I was told that they come in 3s, but I'm not sure if that's actually. Have you ever heard that? But again, it's back.
It comes, and I think again, numbers are so important to us.
Yeah.
And when we see triplicate, we kind of, again, it's easy to put. We put a lot of meaning into that, and not to take away from that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the stats on it or not, but I can see how that becomes the narrative. And then because there's the triplicate, it makes it more special again.
Yeah.
So we were so lucky that people didn't touch these because they stayed on the landscape for so long for us, you know, and when we see that, and I do love, like when, with my students, I'm always running out of figures because, of course, when John DeLorean cut down a ferry fort, you know, his car business went crash. His coke habit had nothing to do with it. And Quinn Insurance, again, the stories that were coming out when Quinn Insurance, during the crash, when he did something against the ferry. So these narratives continue to kind of come out at times that we see, well, that's explaining that. And it's a bit of imagination, it's a bit of fun. It makes us feel connected. It gives us a sense that this is how things have existed in this world for a very long time, and we are connected to that, and it's wonderful.
There's a passage tomb in Snowflake called Four Knocks, and it's from a real passage tomb near Newgrange. And I'd written the passage tomb scene, but I didn't have a name in it. And then I think I was coming back from Belfast, and I just took a turn off on a whim and ended up at that passage tomb. But there was a sign at it that said, key to the passage tomb, key available from a Mr. Finton White. And I was like, that is bizarre that there's a key available. You just rock up to this man's house and be like, do you have a key for the passage tomb? And he brings you on an impromptu tour of the passage tomb. And because it was a Mr. White and Billy is Mr. White, and I was like, that has to be the passage tomb.
Yes, absolutely. And it's Four Knocks. I'm sure many people have been here. It's a kind of a hidden gem, but an amazing passage tomb as well. Yeah. And again, that importance with Maeve's connection to the passage tomb and the importance of the landscape in our narratives going forward.
Because in the book, Billy is bringing people on a tour of a place where his sister has lured young men to have sex with them in her youth. And it's just like the difference between them. It's just like, and how they use the OPW
facilities of the OPW. Yeah.
Can you explain the story about the whitethorn bush that you're not meant to cut down or to bring bad luck? Again, whitethorn, as many of you here will know, again, this kind of sense, you don't touch the whitethorn. And it's in some ways I think it's quite interesting how the whitethorn really stands out now, but you would have known how to engage with every plant you looked at. The blackthorn was also really important, of course. You're using that to make walking sticks and various other things with it. But it just had this imbued power. And I love it because the fairy world exists in our imaginations, absolutely. But the landscape around us is always validating that world exists. So again, we have these markers, and we don't often have to speak about them or talk about them, and it's kind of inherently given to us. And this is the kind of fear when when populations migrate and things, what do we lose? What do we lose? That kind of knowledge that is so ephemeral about it. And it does, there's so many, I'm sorry, I'm doing a whole kind of herbal list in my head now for you, and the ways in which people think of the powers of what it can do, going back to the dandelions, the power in wishing, but dandelions themselves making kind of soups or other things, that poultices out of them. So there's the whole spectrum of healing that we see coming out. And if it's not being used for healing, it's again this image to remind us that we are not alone in this world. And I love it. Our world is quite flat because, you have, in a traditional society, you have this kind of epistemological, cosmological world that you have the Christian world, and that exists, and you have all the saints.
You have the other world and how they are interacting with you at the time. You have all the animals and the personalities that the animals have with you. You have all the historical traditions, such as 1798, coming to you in your landscape. So it's so layered. You're never alone. There is so much going on all the time when you look at this world and these societies.
Over here, yeah.
I very much enjoyed the book, and it's a lovely, lovely story. It's such a contrast when Debbie goes to Trinity and in comparison to the beginning and the lovely stories. I just wonder, were you as a child very involved with the landscape and good research?
My dad always laughed. I never expected him to read the book. I never expected that there would be a book for him to read in the first place. But he was really surprised by the amount that farming came into the book. So no, I was very much an indoors child. There's 4 of us, so I have 3 siblings. And my eldest sister is the best of the girls in the farm, and my brother's taken over the farm. And me and my little sister were absolutely terrible. We were stand in the gap kind of children. You know, like when there's cows to be moved, you stand there and like I did milk cows.
Very important role.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But like when you grow up on a dairy farm, necessity demands that you interact with the landscape. You can't, like, no matter how much I try to avoid work, it follows you. So I did milk a lot of cows, and no matter how much I hated it, it really did and continues to inspire the writing, despite myself, really. But in my imagination, and I really do think that you inherit like the stories that your parents and grandparents carry, even if you don't hear them necessarily. We're a family of storytellers, so I do hear a lot of stories of the farm, but even the stories that go unheard, and there's so much stories that are untold in Irish families, and that kind of, I really think that that's part of the reason why there's so many Irish writers who feel the need. It's nearly like a compulsion to get something down on paper, something that they're not quite sure what it is. And fiction is a really safe place to do that. Because there is no Uncle Billy, there is no Debbie, there is no Maeve. These exist as characters, but they hold the emotions and the anxieties and the magic of life, you know. So thanks a million, I really appreciate that.
Well, I think it just rounds to say thank you, Louise, and thank you, Kelly, for a very entertaining and enjoyable evening.